Everybody, how's it going? Week number 3, a special scary Halloween edition of Food Truck Academy. So I hope that everybody is in their costumes. And yes, you do get extra credit if you happen to be wearing something. Anthony, what have you what have you got on today?
Just spending a fun evening with you, and I will be dressing up later.
I do have a Lucha Libre mask in the back that I was thinking about putting on, but we'll see if that happens. Maybe if there's a lull in some of your presenting, I'll pop that thing on just to mess with you. I love the Lucha Libre. Okay, so week number 3, we are really moving into this thing. This week is going to be covering marketing for your food truck. So like figuring out what your marketing plan is going to be. Also figuring out where you fit within your market in your city. You know, if you are getting started and you're not sure what food concept that you're going to be doing right away, that's a good way to start finding out some ideas, is looking at, you know, what food areas aren't currently served in your area, or if there are other people doing a certain thing that you want to do, like tacos, you know, it kind of helps you find a way like, okay, I'm still going to do tacos. I'm going to find a new way to put a little spin on it there. And then, of course, too, the second big part is really big question, I know, for a lot of folks here, and just a big challenge at any point when you're starting a business is just figuring out how you're going to get the funding for it. Anthony, again, I think I've mentioned this before, but he raised the funds for his food truck in a whole bunch of different ways, from crowdfunding to getting a loan to savings, and being winning part of his funds from a business plan competition. So he's, I think, pretty much, aside from winning the lottery, has kind of he's got experience in all those areas. But before I turn it over to Anthony, I just wanted to make sure that I shared this right away. And I just remembered that Google won't let me share links within the chat because they think that it's spam. But one thing I just wanted to mention, and I'll send this actually out in the email after the class then, but Doug, who's in this class, he's launching a French fry concept. He put together a survey for people to take, and I think it's really, really cool. And I took it, and basically the goal of his survey is to get feedback on some of his menu items and his logo. And I just thought it was a really cool idea that he used to, or is using to, get like feedback about his food concept and what he's planning to do and his brand. So look out for that in the post class email, and definitely check it out. Feel free to weigh in and add your feedback too. I'm sure he would definitely appreciate that, and, you know, help him form the direction of his business in the future. But I thought that was a really cool survey that he put together just within Google Docs. So check that out. I'll send or I'll probably mention it at the end of the class too, for everybody to check out. And sorry, I wanted to add it to the live chat right away so you guys could check it out. But again, just remembered that. So as per the usual, I'll toss it over to Anthony. In the meantime, you know, as per the usual, feel free to ask questions in live chat, and we will get to those before the end of class. So Anthony, I'll turn it over to you. How's it going?
Everything's going great. Happy Halloween, everybody. Hope you guys have a fun and safe evening. This week, we're going to be talking about some marketing things and some market research, and also funding. And you may be asking yourself why those things go together. And the reason is simple. Last week, we were talking about the operations plan, and that stuff was mostly so that you can understand like the things that you need to run the business on a day-to-day basis. All of the stuff that we talk about today is so that funders have an idea that you actually know what you're talking about. This is kind of the theory behind the food truck. And then once we get into the financial stuff, that'll be like the actualization of the food truck operations. So use the information that we talk about this week and in the documentation online to try and start putting together some of these ideas and thinking about the food truck, not from your own perspective, but from somebody else's perspective. And keeping that in mind will really help you kind of like target some things. So you'll notice that in this week's materials, we talk about the market analysis, which has an industry profile where you kind of you can spend like a sentence or like a couple of paragraphs, depends on how you feel, on like, what the food truck industry nationally is like, what it's like in your state, what it's like in your local area. Competition and new entrants, which basically we'll just talk about, obviously, like your competitors. And if you're in an area where there's not too many food trucks, you can look at other restaurants as competition and what it takes for you to enter that market. You'll want to talk about your critical success factors and your critical risk. And those are kind of like the things that you need in order to be successful. The critical risk are the things that, they're pitfalls in the industry, but you can talk about that from the perspective of, this might be a pitfall, but here's how I can turn it into an advantage. So think about the ways that you can overcome these critical risks and turn them into success factors. And the final part of the market analysis section is competitive advantage. So really think about the things that you do well that nobody else does. I've seen a few of you talking about your food concepts, and that is your advantage. You are the most knowledgeable person in your area on that type of food that you're doing. You are a very well-researched food truck owner. You're not going into this blind. Another advantage. You are a gung-ho person who networks at every opportunity. You're going to make sure that your food truck is in all the right spaces. So these are the kinds of like competitive advantages that you have. Obviously, being mobile is also a competitive advantage. So think about those things. Tying into the market analysis, you'll really want to think about your SWOT, which is SWOT, stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And if you do nothing else in the marketing analysis section of the business plan, you'll really want to at least in the SWOT analysis. So think about your strengths, think about your weaknesses. So like, for instance, strengths can be a weakness, mobility can be a strength, but at times it can also be a weakness when somebody, asks you a question like, where are you located? Well, this food truck is where I'm located, and you have to find our location, or here's our schedule, that sort of thing. So think about your strengths, think about your weaknesses, and actually write them down and try and come up with as many as possible. Opportunities are ways that you can take advantage of your strengths, and think about ways that you can overcome your weaknesses. So you can actually look at your weaknesses as an opportunity. So for instance, as I said earlier, your mobility can be looked at as a weakness, but at the same time, if you have a website, that's a way to overcome your weakness. We're very mobile. It might be hard to find us, but here's a resource that you can use to find us on a daily basis. Social media, that sort of thing. So really kind of spend some time thinking about your strengths and weaknesses, and then try and figure out, obviously you're going to use your strengths as opportunities, but also try and leverage your weaknesses into even additional opportunities. The final piece of the SWOT analysis is threats. So think about the things that affect your business and how the strengths and weaknesses kind of play into those threats. So you'll see in the materials for this week also that there's kind of like a little grid that you can use as a guide. You can either, just copy and paste it and start typing in there, or you can draw it out and just start listing things. If you have a whiteboard, that might be a great opportunity to kind of keep in your mind. And as you do more research, you can fill in more of these kinds of areas within the SWOT analysis. So as you learn more about the business, you'll realize maybe this is a weakness, but then as you learn more and more about it, you turn that weakness into a strength because you have much more information about this particular area. And actually, a lot of times we leverage weaknesses into strengths. So something that's weak for us is also a weakness for competitors of ours, specifically talking about food trucks. And admitting that that's a weakness, you can start to realize the opportunities associated with that weakness, and you can then leverage that to be more successful than your competitors, than your direct competitors. And so what's a weakness for other food trucks in your area is now a strength for you compared to them. So think about that. One thing I will say, and this was a question that specifically talking about the business plan competition, which I'll go to, I was asked a lot about competition between food trucks and restaurants. And so when you think of your competitors, you're going to think about two types of competitors. There's direct and indirect competitors. The direct competitors are people who, like, if you're vending at a park, for instance, and another food truck is there, that's a direct competitor. They're people who can steal customers from you, but vice versa, you can steal customers from them. An indirect competitor would be, restaurants, fast food places, that sort of thing. They're industry, but they're not really, they're not right next door to you. You're not going to park like right outside of a restaurant unless you're doing some kind of like event or something like that. So you're not going to park like right outside the front door of a restaurant and try and like pilfer their customers, because all of the advantage of them is that they have like indoor seating, heating, cooling, whatever, and people are going to like want an inviting environment. So they like kind of hurt yourself in that scenario. But be thought of as a competitor because they're there, there's so many people in your city, a certain percentage of them will eat out on any given night. And so like what percentage of those people willing to eat out are willing to go to your food truck versus like a restaurant or a fast food joint or another food truck. So these are just things to think about. And as you think about more of these strengths and weaknesses, you really want to the strength of the SWOT analysis is really in thinking about the opportunities and the threats, being aware of the things that can hurt your business and being aware of the things that can make you successful. And that's where the funders will start to look at your business plan and determine if you've thought this through, if you're a risk or less of a risk. Every business is a risk. So if you're less of a risk in this regard. So really try and take your time with it. It doesn't take much time, but also as you gain more information in this realm, it'll be easy to fill out. So you could spend 5 minutes a day over the course of develop the concept that you're working on and put this together, and it'll feel like a breeze. You could try and sit down over a weekend and hammer it out, but that might be a little bit more of a struggle. So I'd encourage you to just kind of take your time with it.
Tyler has a good question that's related to this topic. Well, specifically is about this topic. What was your biggest weakness, and then how did you overcome it?
Initially, our biggest weakness was being new, and so we didn't have the client base that all the other food trucks have. So we tried to use that as an opportunity to build a client base before we even got open. So we did a couple of festivals. And we did a lot of social media promotion in the beginning to build up awareness. And then the first day of business that we had was actually so we also wanted to make sure that we hit the ground running and got our name out there, vending in the truck on day one. As over time, part of the benefit of being a food truck is that you can go different places. So if this one spot is dead, you're not tied to that for the next 8 weeks of your life on every Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or whatever. You can just say, hey, it's not working out, I'm going somewhere else, and go somewhere else. So leveraging the ability to move and get yourself in front of as many eyes as possible was a way that we could, help turn around the fact that we're new and that nobody knows us. So we made sure that we tried to hit all the major events, that we were in some of the busiest places. Like Brett and I talked about a few weeks ago, that there's a Albuquerque Food Truck Association, and we were on the mailing list for that thing. So whenever any kind of like request for a substitution came up, or somebody wanted like a food truck to cover an event, or they were asking for catering, I made sure that we responded to like any request within the first like 10, 15 minutes of that request going out there. One, it established us as like prompt and excellent customer service, but also we beat out all of the other food trucks by getting that information first and establishing ourselves as like, you know, these guys do everything and they're pretty quick about it. We'll play to your advantage.
And Anthony, too, I think your audio cut out for just a second there. What was your first day of business? And just in case anybody missed that too, like your first day of business before you got the truck, you guys basically did pop-ups for a few events, right?
Yeah. So there was like the first major event we did, we didn't have a food truck, and it was this thing called the Chocolate and Coffee Festival. And it was like there was like an audience of like 16,000 people for that event. Our first day of business, like with the food truck, I don't remember the name because this was like 3 years ago, but it was like this national train day thing that our city government put together. So we had it at like this really old train station, and there's a bunch of food trucks there. And if I had to estimate the attendance, there was probably like 5,000 people at this event. So it was like a really great way to launch ourselves, and it also had the benefit of not having an entrance fee for food trucks, so we got to vend for free and kick ass. And apologies for the audio cutting out. Hopefully that's a
yeah. Kristen mentioned it would be helpful to go through like the SWOT matrix on your screen. I don't know if you have it available nearby your desktop. I know it's in the like class documents for this week that you put together. I think you have it, yeah, listed out for week 3 to kind of go through it. But let's see. Could you like just more thoroughly explain some of the critical success factors, and maybe outline 2? And I know you mentioned maybe like 1 or 2. What are some of the like other examples of like threats that you had, especially at the beginning?
Yeah, let me, so I think I can screen share this, but then let me pull up my original business plan so that I can go off of that information.
And while Anthony's looking that up, Jennifer puts up a good point too. It's funny, but I'm mostly encouraged to hear that pop-up option isn't crazy. And yeah, I would definitely say like the pop-up option is a really good way to kind of like test out your food without having to buy a truck beforehand, and make sure that like your menu is going to work out well. Or even doing like a little bit of a, trying to get some catering gigs, that sort of thing, because getting catering business is going to be almost the same as getting catering business on a truck. It might be a little bit harder because once you start going out, there's going to be more people approaching you, just kind of organically, and finding out about you and coming to you. But I think for the first few times, that's a really great way to go about it. And I actually know a few different food trucks that started out just doing random pop-ups for like 6 months even, all the way up to years. So I think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, pop-ups also have the additional advantage of they're kind of trendy right now. So like when you're offering like the availability of exclusivity, so they feel like they're part of something special. They're getting something like unique. You can even partner with businesses to do a pop-up. So a lot of times, like you can do it at like in a private business, like if it's closed for the evening, that's kind of considered like a private venue. You could do it at somebody's house, for instance. But I've seen like pop-ups at breweries, like in Albuquerque a few times we'll have like a traveling chef through the area, and he'll like work with a brewery and do like a special kitchen. He'll just like set up like a couple of burners in their back area and like invite a few people to come and have dinner for like whatever price they establish. So there's like the appearance of exclusivity, which customers like. If you go the option of like promoting your business ahead of time, then you can like offer that to like your existing customers or your future customers as like a chance to like get a sneak peek at your menu, so they could like be part of something new, feel like they've been with you from the beginning, kind of like build that customer loyalty. So okay, so I pulled up, and this is available to you guys as well. If you go into like the week 1 materials, you'll see the Switch It Up business plan. All of this stuff is written in there, but we can talk about it for a second. So under like the competition and new entrants, one of the things
you might need to share your screen, Anthony. I think it's on the left side there.
Oh, well, what I'm looking at right now is just a paragraph, but I think that would be kind of boring. I'm happy to share it.
Never mind.
When I get to the SWOT analysis, I'll show that part. But yeah, so under competition and new entrants, I talked about the local food truck climate, some of the biggest names in the space. And then I broke down some of their biggest issues. For instance, like one day I went to a food truck park and watched all the food trucks serve their customers. And I noticed that when the food trucks were the busiest, that they took 20 to 30 minutes to get each plate out the window. And so I kind of noticed like some of the things that were happening. I noticed like some of the trucks would have lines of like 5-10 people, and they weren't getting customers their order quick enough, and they also weren't serving customers quick enough. So I kind of noted their disadvantages and then included that in there. So this is like one of those things like it's happening. Okay, I can focus my attention to take advantage of their disadvantage. And this is one of those things where I talked earlier about turning an opportunity into a success. I mean, turning a weakness into an opportunity. Under critical success factors, talked about, like putting yourself in front of as many customers as possible. So finding high traffic areas, areas where there's a lot of people, maybe like professional business parks, where they don't have a lot of opportunity to like leave for a while and go get food. And there's also nothing around to go get lunch. Maybe there's like a cafeteria that nobody really wants to eat at. So, and then establishing like these as like concrete things that are happening in your community. So like listing these things out would be a really good idea for critical success factors. Talking about how you intend to like establish a relationship with your customers to drive repeat business is something that you definitely want to talk about. And then also talk about the advantages of like your menu. Like we're going to do like seasonal menu, local ingredients, so on and so forth. Under critical risk, I talked about the things that is subject to every food truck. You might have truck performance issues. Weather conditions affect whether you can get to your locations or not. Location limitations, like, maybe there's only like one brewery in your town or like one train station, and there's not a whole lot of like public events. Those would be like location limitations. Customer preference, customer awareness, them not being familiar with you in the beginning. But then using the same opportunity here under the critical risk, talking about how you can kind of flip the opportunity and present itself. So instead of just harping on the negative, talking about how you intend to overcome that. So not only does that show that you're aware of these threats to your business, but also that you have a plan in place to overcome these threats and not let it be a hindrance. And really, that's kind of what like funders will really want to look at, is like they want to know that you've done your research and know like what the pitfalls are, but that you also have a plan in place to overcome that thing. Because if you're just like, oh, woe is me, there's only like this thing, I have to make sure I'm there first kind of thing. They're like, well, you didn't really do your homework here, and you're not really setting yourself up for success. So you're a high risk for this business to fail. Another thing that I talked about was the purchasing of the truck. For instance, I put that under critical risk, talking about like issues with truck performance issues. And this was based on like an interview I did with a bunch of food truck owners. I asked them all locally, like, have you had issue with your truck? What kinds of mechanical failure have you had? Where do you park your truck, and where do you like go to get your truck fixed? That way I was like, okay, if this is likely to happen, at least I know like where I can go for immediate service and where I can go to protect my truck from vandalism and theft. That way I'm not down and out if like somebody breaks into my truck and steals like all of our silverware or whatever. They probably would steal like something more valuable like our generator. But knowing like what kinds of things can happen and how to repair that or remedy it immediately are the kinds of things you want to talk about in your critical risk section. Does that help at all? If it does, I hope it is very helpful. If it's not, keep asking questions and I'll make sure to get to them. All right, now let me share the SWOT analysis. And Brett, let me know if this works. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. I know it's probably hard. Let me try and like shrink the screen. Does that make it better?
Yeah, it's not bad. Yeah, it's not bad.
Okay, so in the week 2 or the week 3 documents, you'll see this graph, and you could easily just Google SWOT SWOT analysis template, and you'll find like 1,000 things that look like this. But I like this one particularly because gives you like the categories themselves all lined up on the outside. So you have like strengths and weaknesses here across the top. You have opportunities and threats across the side. So you can sit there and think about these things and list them out. And then on the inside, because it's a grid, you have the ability to list out opportunities that are based on strengths. So strategies on how you can use your strengths as opportunity, and then strategies on how you can use your weaknesses as an opportunity. So taking advantage of your weaknesses, which by the way, are also weaknesses of all of your direct competitors, all the other food trucks. And then likewise with the threats, how you can use your strengths to avoid the threats that you notice, how you can minimize your weaknesses, but then also how you can, use the opportunities that you highlighted above to overcome those threats and minimize them at the same time. So use this template. It's available in the week 3 materials, or you can just Google SWOT analysis template and find something that works for you. And overall, though, it's a pretty standard thing, so it should be pretty easy for you to find something. And if you have any problems, again, email Brett or myself, and I'm happy to help. Should we spend some time talking about funding?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let me just ask one more question here too. Thank you. This is from Tyler. Asked this before, sort of along the same lines. But what are your thoughts on commuter stations or train stations? I'm in a spot where I have hundreds of people commuting daily, especially in the early morning. So coffee, breakfast could be a good one. What are your thoughts on that particular location?
Yeah, I love that idea. No, yeah, I love that idea. Like a bus station might not be the best place, but a train station where people have to like get there early and they're waiting for the train, great place to do it. You can set yourself up for success by having like things that are very easy to prepare. So like coffee, for instance, you probably don't want to be like like local coffee shop espresso maker kind of quality. I mean, you want to have that kind of quality, but you don't want it to be like that kind of prep time. It takes like 4 or 5, 10 minutes to get a drink. Where people can go and like, I pay right now and I know I'm going to get a cup of coffee 20 seconds later. And maybe there's some pastries or breakfast things that are already prepared that I can see in the window and just point at, pay, and get all of that stuff at the same time. Because those guys are usually like in a rush and you really want high turnover. So I like the thinking, and you can really set yourself up for success if you just kind of prepare for what those people want. And it doesn't even hurt to like go there, watch how people interact in that area. A couple mornings, you know, maybe an hour for like an hour a week for like a few weeks, just to see like what kinds of people are there, when the busiest times are, and how long people spend at the train station. So, you know, like if they're spending a little bit more time, maybe you can have like a couple of more elaborate breakfast items. And I think I saw you say earlier that you also wanted to do like evening having dinner prepared, they kind of just grab and go kind of thing. And if you did that as well, you know, you get them coming and going. You build a reputation in the morning, they'll stop and talk and take the stuff to go in the evening. So you kind of get them in both ends of the spectrum. I think it's a really good idea. But definitely spend the time to research that area.
Yeah. Yeah, Melanie put out a good point too. In her town, city doesn't allow food vendors near the train station within probably 150 feet or whatever the rule is there. So definitely check with the city before going forward with that one. But yeah, I guess maybe move, because I want to make sure we get to the funding part too, and then probably go back to some of the questions as well, because I'm sure there's going to be some funding questions as well.
So I just noticed that Jennifer said it's hard to invest a couple $1,000s on pop-up before the truck. When we talk about pop-up, you can do it in a really low budget sort of way where you just like buy like a $30 butane burner, or maybe you buy like 3 $30 butane burners. You already have your like cooking utensils for the truck because you're going to need pots and pans and that sort of thing. And really all it comes down to is the cost for the fuel for that day and the cost for the food that you're making. So you can kind of keep it low budget. And if you find the right venues, maybe it's at like a friend's house, or you get catered to like cook at this place, then you also don't have to pay for like the overhead portion of it. So you can do it in a really low budget way. So keep that in mind as you think about that.
And I know there's Barbara who's in this class. I don't know if she's here tonight. I haven't seen her online, but she, and let me know if you are here, Barbara, but she has been doing the pop-up thing. Actually, she has a Hawaiian food concept. So she's been going to these Hawaiian, I guess I'll call them like festivals in California where she is, and doing super, super well. And that's kind of what's like encouraged her to move on to like the next step, getting a food truck, is because there's, you know, so many people at this event that were like, hey, I love your food, you know, where's your restaurant, or is your food truck? You know, and it just kind of started out as like a part-time thing. So I could definitely like bring her on too, especially in that open week 7 in the future. If there's a lot of folks from the class that want to hear more about that.
So money, is it money time?
Let's talk money.
So I'm gonna pre-warn all of you. This part's kind of dry, but I hope that there's some things that you guys find very helpful, because we're all looking for money here. We're all trying to figure out how to fund our business. So it's important to know, important where you can go to look for these sorts of things. But again, it's a little dry. So there's lots of different ways that you can fund your truck, and there's you know, my motto is basically like turn over every stone. So as you're doing the research for all of this other stuff about the business, hopefully you by chance come across some of these other ways. Some of them you already know, like you can fund it yourself. You can put your own money into the business, which, especially if you're asking for a loan, is highly encouraged because the bank will want to see that you're invested in your own business, that you're putting, not only putting the time, but you're putting your own money. So they see like you're investing in this, taking it seriously, so that they should take it seriously as well. So you self-fund it. You can ask friends and family. I don't really like that idea. A lot of people do it, but I've also heard some horror stories. Sometimes there's expectations when money comes from family, especially like, you know, are they going to be part owners? Maybe they feel that they have the leeway for input here. And if you're going to ask money from friends and family, definitely make sure that you set expectations ahead of time. I'm not saying to like draw up a contract, but if that helps, then absolutely go for it. You really want to be clear like with your boundaries in this case. That way there's nothing like, hey, I gave you like $10,000 for this business. I'm telling you that you should do this, but you know, it's my business. So do I really have to take what you say and do it, even if I think if it's like a huge risk or not worthwhile? So really kind of set those expectations and boundaries. Obviously, I went through a business plan competition. I won $5,000. Those aren't always available, but you know, speak with people at like your local small business association, university businesses, business schools will host these sorts of things, and just kind of keep your ear to the ground. And if you also have like any small business incubators, small business development centers, that sort of thing, they'll be in tune to these types of funding options. So ask around and find out. They're kind of harder to come by, but usually the biggest secret to like a business plan competition is just having the business plan well thought out. When I entered my business plan competition, I didn't think that we necessarily had like the biggest pie in the sky idea, because it was like at its core, it's just a food truck. So I was banking on the fact that most of the people entering this thing were doing pie in the sky stuff, but not putting in the time to research the business. I got into the top 3, I'm like 90% sure, purely on the fact that like I researched every nook and cranny of the business. And actually like a few of the judges had came up to me after the competition and said like this was the most like well-researched business plan that they had read in a long time, which made me really proud that one, like they recognized the hard work, and two, that like I was essentially right, like all these other people kind of fell out because maybe they had a great idea, but they didn't really spend much time thinking about how they were going to accomplish it. They were just focused on the idea and kind of pitching it like it was just like a game. So take it seriously. Obviously, like the big one is like loans. And there's a few places that you're going to look. You're going to look at banks, classic banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, all the national stuff. If you've had a business before, you can kind of leverage that as like, I've built credit, I'm not a risk kind of thing. If you haven't been catering for a year or so, if this is like your first venture right away and you're using this money to get started and you haven't done anything prior to asking this bank for loan, you're going to have a hard time, especially with like the national banks. Local credit unions might have a little bit of a different philosophy. And one thing that I was able to turn up was I specifically Googled small business loans in Albuquerque. I typed those words into Google and came up with a few nonprofits that act like federal credit unions. So they're nonprofits established to fund small businesses. And you know, the scheme works exactly the same way as a normal bank. They loan money, you pay back the loan, that sort of thing. But their whole mission is funding small businesses. And so the bank that loaned us the money was one of these small business nonprofits. And there was a few caveats, like I was only eligible for a $25,000 loan. and the rates were already kind of locked at, I think it was 4.5%, which we paid off already. But definitely try that. Definitely Google small business loans. You'll see like all the banks, but then you'll also turn up these local organizations. Also, make sure that you check out your small business development centers, small business incubators, small business associations. I know there's a lot of acronyms, but because they also will know specific people in these organizations to talk to who specialize in either your type of business, food trucks, or they know, this person specifically deals with new business owners. This person specifically deals with the restaurant industry, so on and so forth. So definitely do some research and ask literally everybody. Go to the other food trucks in your area, ask them where they got their loan from, because every city is different. But definitely make sure that you do your research in that regard. A big place to get your money from is crowdfunding. There's a lot of people going to the crowdfunding route. And I mean, Brett can tell you from the hundreds of thousands of interviews he's done on the topic, that it's not a cakewalk. It's like doing marketing for 40 hours a week for 10 weeks, because you have to, put together the plan of how you're going to promote this thing, promote it in your crowdfunding campaign, and then while that thing's going, promote the crowdfunding campaign. So you're doing like this for while you're doing it is going to be your full-time job. And it's like a lot of networking and marketing, and it's a good way to develop the skills in those things. But the key with it is to make sure that you're very realistic in your approach. So if you like now have friends and family that you're talking to, don't expect to raise like $20,000. If you have like, a blog and you've been doing this for a while and you have kind of an audience, maybe you can raise like $10, $15, $20,000. But you also have to make sure that like you've built a relationship with that audience, and it's beyond like your local area. One of the other things that I always talk about with crowdfunding is that you really, when you're thinking about like the rewards for crowdfunding, don't treat it as like a donation to your business. Treat it as like a prepay for service. So when I did the crowdfunding campaign, the reward levels were like, if you give us, $10, you'll get at the food truck once it opens. If you give us like $50, we'll like host you over for like a private evening. If you give us $500 or $1,000, we'll do a catering thing for you. And then there was one reward level where we actually like sent them like specialty jams that we had produced. I was talking about this last week, I think. The specialty jams that we produced that you guys can taste test, let us know how it is, but also, just enjoy for yourself. So think about your rewards. Remember that it's like a ton of marketing, and that this is not something you have to do. There's other ways of getting money. So if it doesn't seem right for you, then don't pursue it, because you're going to waste a lot of time. And also keep expectations low and aim high, if that makes any sense. Anything to add on the crowdfunding angle?
I would just say, if within the private members area, within the bonus section, if you do want to learn more about crowdfunding, we've got a video interview with a guy who has, I want to say, like one of the top 10 highest income generating crowdfunding campaigns of all time on Kickstarter. And I think he raised something like $27,000, $28,000 through his crowdfunding campaign. And his name is Malcolm Bedell. But yeah, I would definitely listen to him, because he outlines his entire step-by-step process for like what he did. But literally it was like, for 2 months before the campaign even opened, he was emailing blogs just like nonstop. Like he didn't have a full-time job or anything like that at the time. So he just dedicated 100% of his efforts to like emailing people, emailing journalists, emailing newspapers, just like anyone that would listen to him, to talk about this crowdfunding campaign that he was doing. And he also had kind of some like video background skills. So he was able to put together like a real nice kind of funny video and that sort of thing on his Kickstarter page. But he even said when we were talking to him was that like after all the work that he put into it, and like he said it was definitely worthwhile, but that like some of his bonuses that are incentives that he had created, like I think he had t-shirts for a certain level. Like some of the people didn't get their hadn't had their t-shirts yet, and it had been like six months after the campaign had ended. So definitely like if you do want to go down that path, just realize like you're gonna have to spend a couple months of work up front if you want it to be successful, and then think about like how much your bonuses are gonna end up costing you. And then it may not, you know, like you might be better off just getting a part-time job in some cases. Or if you have a goal of, instead of like, obviously all this work is if you want to get to like one of the, you know, over $20,000, for example, of like through crowdfunding, you're gonna have to put in a ton of work. But, you know, if you just want to raise a couple thousand, you know, with friends and family, that can be a little bit easier. Just one other example, there was a woman, her name's Linda Jo Kushner. She was a woman, I think she's like in her early 50s, but she had, so she didn't have any like social media experience per se, but she'd owned businesses in her town beforehand. And I think she had done like redecorating homes, I think is what she had done for something like 20 years. So she was able, so obviously she knew a ton of other people, past customers, you know, past businesses that she'd worked with. She was able to talk to all those people and then let them know, hey, I've got a crowdfunding campaign, and basically just emailed everyone that she knew, put together this email just explaining like her story, you know, saying, you know, talking about her journey, talking about how she was wanting to go through a career change, how she'd always dreamed about starting a restaurant or a food truck. And she was able to generate about the same amount of revenue, I think like $25,000 through crowdfunding that way. So yeah, there's some different ways that you can do it, but she had a unique advantage where she knew a ton of people. And then those people helped spread her message, you know, by email, by sharing her story with friends that they knew, and it just kind of snowballed from there. So yeah, if this is something you want to pursue, definitely listen to Malcolm's interview in the bonus section. He outlines everything. I think it probably takes about an hour for him to get through, but you'll have a very, very clear idea of like the different steps to take from somebody that's like raised large sums through there. Like obviously, Anthony, you were shooting for $5,000, I think, is about what you raised. So what you had to do was like a lot different than what like Malcolm had to do.
Right. But it's pretty similar process overall, but like our fundraising goals and our audiences were completely different. One thing I will definitely say is that there is a like a 10-week plan on like all the steps you need to take to get through a successful crowdfunding campaign. So definitely look at that. It's in the same area, the bonus crowdfunding section of the members area. So definitely look through that.
Yeah. And yeah, and then, I would just check out you probably typed in this like 30 minutes ago, probably not that long ago, but yeah, check out that interview with Malcolm, and he outlines everything with his plan. That's like he's one of the top 10 of all time on Kickstarter, which is like the largest crowdfunding, well, top 10 of all time raising money for a food truck, I should say. So yeah, he definitely is a good person to learn from.
Right. And then you can the crowdfunding campaign that is still out there on the internet. Like Brett said earlier, I can't type in the link because it thinks it's spam. But if you Google Food Start, and I'll just type that in there. If you Google Food Start and search Switch It Up, you can find everything that we use to raise as much money as we did. And actually, I think on their homepage there's like a map, and literally we are the only food truck or the only vendor from New Mexico. You can click the little New Mexico button and get to our crowdfunding campaign there as well.
I'll just send out the link to it too, so that everybody can check out what you did in the post-call email too. But I would just say, don't use Food Start. Anybody that's
I think they pulled it, but their website,
because I don't think they're like actually an active website anymore. This is like a few years ago that Anthony used that. Yeah, go with one of the big ones like a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe. Almost everyone's familiar with that now, and kind of trusts campaigns that are on there. So that's a good way to go.
Right. The one last thing I'll say about crowdfunding is that everybody thinks that if you just put it out there, people will just, and that happens like 1 in a million times. So don't expect to like write a Kickstarter campaign and then Kickstarter will just start tweeting it. They will only like highlight like the very best in the field. So you got to put a lot of work in if you want to even get noticed.
Mm-hmm. And then Tyler asked too, what's the best approach to get people to fund your business? I mean, the lowest hanging fruit is people you know, and that's what makes up a lot of these crowdfunding campaigns. Like, who do you know, and do you know people that have money, extra money, that are willing to donate? Maybe they support entrepreneurial things, and they like what you're doing and that sort of thing. That's definitely the people that you want to talk to first. It's harder to get, especially large contributions, with people that aren't aware of you or don't know about you in any way. And then, this is a good question, because I think you mentioned this in this week's course too, but how much working capital do you recommend starting with, Anthony?
I don't think there's an exact dollar amount, but you definitely want to start with a non-trivial amount of money. So I put in like, it was $20,000. And most of that went to pay for the food truck and put a down payment and stuff like that. But when we got started, we had $5,000 in capital to like buy supplies and all that stuff. And I think I would have felt more comfortable with, looking back on it now, I would have felt more comfortable if we had a little bit more in there. So somewhere in the range of like 7 to 10 would be awesome. It really depends on like what you need to do once you get the food truck going. 5,000 is a good cushion. And you also like want to consider like, okay, what if, we don't get that many gigs in the beginning? We kind of need to have a little bit of extra cash to like get us through the first 6 months roughly. So think about what your expenses are going to be, and then kind of have that kind of a cushion for like a 6-month cushion of all of your expenses in your capital account.
Also on the topic of funding, Gonzalo asks, if self-funding, can I do a contract or loan agreement with my own business just like I would with any other investor or bank loan, so that you can get your investment back? I think with that, and Anthony, feel free to share your perspective on this. I mean, you could get a loan, but it would be based on like the truck that you're purchasing. So you could get it that way. Otherwise, I don't think, if you're starting a new business, you probably won't be able to get a loan anyway, because you don't have like a history of revenue. If you had been around for like 5 years, or you have had a business for like 5 years, you know what I mean? You could probably get a loan that way based on like, okay, this business has strong revenue. We're going to give these people a loan because we know that we're fairly confident that they're going to have the money available to pay this off eventually. But if you're just starting out, it's going to be, you're basically going to have to take it out against your truck because that's kind of the collateral. So if you're not able to pay the loan, they'll take the truck back from you. And fortunately, over the last couple of years, it's become easier for people to, I guess banks are starting to understand like that there's value in a food truck. I know a few years ago that was harder to do. And I would also, if you do, whoever you end up finding to build your food truck, if you haven't, found, if the bank that you work with usually, for example, won't give you a loan for the truck, it may just be because they don't really understand the business. And, a lot of times builders have connections with other people that they're used to doing financing with, that they can kind of point you to and help you figure that part out. Any I don't know, any other thoughts on that?
I think he was saying that if he is putting in a large chunk of money, how can he work it out so that he gets his own money back?
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the question, then I think you can do a loan agreement. Definitely talk to an accountant about it, because this is more of like an accounting type of question. So if you're thinking about like putting up, let's say it's like $20,000, and you may want to make sure that you get that money back, there's kind of two ways of thinking about it. One is the business could pay you back slowly over the next couple of years or whatever, or the accountant will just note that you put this money in there now, and if you sell the food truck down the line, then that investment that you made initially will come back to you when you sell the food truck. So like from an accounting standpoint, you zero out the balance. And that way the reason why I mentioned that is because then it's like not a tax thing. So like you're not if you happen to sell the truck or something happens and you have to close the business, that money that is there isn't like a $20,000 income or a $30,000 income in one lump sum. It's like, well, you already gave that money to the business. Now that cash is just going back where it came from. So it's not like it's not income. It's just like reinvesting or redistributing the funds. So definitely talk to an accountant about like what would work best in your situation. And different accountants for certainly have different ways of doing it, and it kind of all works out the same way in the end. It's just how you get taxed on it now, and that kind of ties also into salary. So like if you do the loan thing, the one thing you have to be careful of is if like you want to take a salary from the truck, then make sure that like the loan payments are very specific, and that there's a portion of money that are expenses from the truck account that's like a loan payment, and an expense from the truck account that's like your salary.
Awesome. I think I can.
all very valid and correct points though.
Okay. So here's one for you from Just Be Girl. Is it hard to try to operate a food truck if you already have a regular job? I would imagine that is going to make it a little more difficult. Before you answer though, Anthony, I'll just make sure that just did an interview with someone that was in our last food truck academy. His name is Dave Kralik. He's a super awesome guy. They started their food truck business like just over the last summer. Him and his wife both have full-time jobs. And they just started doing it on weekends. And he said, like, yeah, it's hard. You know what I mean? Like, it's harder than it would be without having a job. But from the sounds of it, like any weekend they can basically get booked. You just like kind of have to book out time after you get done with your normal day job, 9 to 5. Do a little bit of email. You start preparing. Use your evenings to prepare for the weekend, basically. But so far, it's worked out really well for him and his situation. Like he's just like, we can make revenue, we can get gigs, we're building our business without really any stress, because we just, you know what I mean. If there's a bad event, one weekend event's a home run, one is not a home run. From their point of view, it's like they're still fine financially. so they don't have to stress about it too much. So yeah, harder from time standpoint, but from a stress standpoint, might be a good idea to keep it for a while until at least you kind of get things going and you're like, yes, this totally is a no-brainer for me to quit my job. And I mean, it depends how much you're making at your job too. So I mean, it depends. It's a personal, I guess, decision, but I think starting with a job is a good way to do it. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I think you hit all the points. The other thing to think about is like if you don't really have a huge audience, then you have to start kind of like marketing if you're going to do it on the weekends, for instance. So if you have a regular job, maybe you're going to do like one evening a week. Maybe you do like Saturdays every weekend. You got to either like line up catering gigs in your evenings, which would be kind of challenging to go out and market constantly while you have like a 8 to 6 kind of job. Or if you like, if you're already like, you're just going to do like breweries or public vending sort of stuff, then you have to like kind of line up where you're going to be instead of schedule, which is probably a little easier, but still challenging in its own right. So consider that if you're planning on doing that. Consider all these different things. A few people that I know who have kind of done that, like one guy has like a full-time job. He's like a general contractor. So he just like paid for his food truck in cash, and he basically like has his kids run the truck, and then he does the weekend gigs where it's like probably more money because he's doing like bigger events and that sort of thing. But he has his kids run it during the week. And he's an older guy, so his kids are all like 20 years old at this point. A few other people will like have their like spouse who has like a good regular job kind of like front them the cash, and then they run it in their day-to-day. And I've seen quite a few people do it that way. They have like some kind of backing. So think about that as well. If you already have a job, then consider this as like a test if you can just play with the cash. If you're like in a more financially strapped situation, then you want to try and figure out a balance between how much time you can spend on the truck and how much money the truck needs to operate.
Cool. Just going back on some of these, looking through, trying to make sure that we're getting all these questions answered. One of the ones, this is off topic, I think, from crowdfunding or raising money specifically, but curious. This one's from Jennifer, and feel free to correct me, Jennifer, if I'm like asking the wrong question here. Also curious if you weighed the impact of obtaining versus not obtaining a trademark for your food truck name. Is that like something you ever thought about or kind of like considered, Anthony?
Yeah, so I did like tons of research on this like 5 years ago. I probably forgot most of it, but thing that I can tell you is like when you're trademarking your food truck, you're literally trademarking like the brand name and like the design of like your packaging and all that stuff. You're not really protecting like the recipes or anything. So I kind of think of it as like a waste. If you have like investors and you know that you're gonna like go big, like you're gonna do the food truck as like a kind of early marketing thing, but then you're gonna like develop product and put that in stores, they'll probably want to see you do the trademark route. Again, like I kind of think it's a waste of time, especially if you don't have that much capital in the beginning to begin with, because you have to like go to a lawyer, have them draw up the paperwork. They'll charge you a couple $1,000s to get that done with. You'll want to have like a decent brand strategy and like logo and all that stuff. And if you want to have like a good logo, unless you're like a really good graphic designer, you're gonna have to pay a couple $1,000s for that work as well. So right there, that's like a work done just for like this thing that really doesn't mean all that much. And the one other thing that I remember about it is that the US like Patent and Copyright Office or whatever it's called, like grants you like by default, and the lawyer's job literally is to like file the trademark protection. So like you're given the trademark by default. Filing for protection allows you to like sue people if they violate your trademark. And you could actually, if I remember correctly, you can actually like do this in retrospect. If you find somebody like violating your trademark, you can establish that you were the first person to have it, that you can register it and then sue them afterwards. It's a whole lot of like wasted money kind of thing. So start there, do some research, talk to a lawyer if that's really how you want to go about it.
Cool. Let me see here. Is anybody, I guess, I don't know if this is a question from Tony, but is anyone thinking about a trailer or cart instead of a food truck? And I know Doug, you're doing the trailer thing. I guess since this is sort of on the line of like funding, do you have any like preferences between food truck and trailer, or what are your opinion on that?
I really like the truck. I've seen people do stuff with trailers, and there's advantages. Like the disadvantages are like it's really hard to drive around, and you got to find parking for this thing, and it's always like cumbersome getting it in and out. I prefer just like, and then setting up within like 5 minutes. Next week we talk, well, not next week, in 2 weeks, we talk like a ton about this. So we'll save, if you can, save comments for that discussion, because we'll go like way in depth about like food truck versus trailer and like kitchen layouts and like local regulations and all that stuff.
Cool. Awesome. I think that's all the questions I see right now. One thing I did want to mention and follow up on from last week is I think there was a question about the organization that handles like booking gigs outside of Home Depot and like other home improvement stores. And I just added a link to that. The Street Eats Ltd is the name of the organization that books home improvement stores. So they work with like Home Depot directly and some other ones too. And Ricky, actually, this one might be potentially good for you if you want to head that direction. But I know they work with a lot of, I know someone expressed interest in like vending outside of those locations. And I know they work with like carts, and they work with hot dog carts specifically. So if that is something that you want to do, those are like the people that you would reach out to if you wanted to get in front of a Home Depot and start doing that. I know that there is a fee to pay. It's sort of like, it's almost like renting out a space, right? Anywhere else. If you wanted to have like a regular restaurant, so you would pay like your monthly rent to be able to sit in front of a Home Depot. But it's something to consider. And then of course, you know, depending on where the Home Depot is located, the price is going to vary a little bit, depending on how much you're going to have to pay on a monthly basis. So that, you know, that's definitely something worth looking into if it kind of fits your food model. Obviously, the customers that you're going to be meeting there, it's going to be, you know, a lot of early morning people, a lot of more lunchtime people, just looking to grab something quick, something like cheaper, you know, something that you can produce cheaply, like hot dogs, is probably going to do better there than something like gourmet and super high end, obviously. So just wanted to follow up on that one. Oh, one other thing, actually, question that wasn't covered that I know was missed. When you're starting out, how do you keep the food costs down? Like, what do you recommend for that early on before you've maybe established yourself as a food truck in the area?
There's a lot of, one thing you gotta do is you gotta be like real creative with how you're using your food. So reusing supplies is a great way to do it. Having like garnish, for instance, don't create like 5 different garnishes, one for everything on your menu, create like, you know, a garnish that you can use and all of that. That way you minimize waste. Use foods that you can use in multiple ways. So like onions, celery, carrot, you can use in a lot of different things. And then if you have any scraps and leftovers, boom, you can make a soup out of it. Like maximum bang for your buck. So not only are you like doing your normal stuff, but then you could run a soup special and you're making like double profit. Another good thing is if you get like a catering gig and like you have a bunch of leftovers from it, you get to keep the leftovers, and then you can use the leftovers on your regular menu. So you're not wasting all that food and you're making an extra profit because it was already paid for in the beginning. So like one of the first weddings that we catered, we had made all this like pumpkin ravioli. We had like, I don't know, like 3,000 like ravioli squares that we handmade. And we were like, we're not throwing this away because we handmade all of it. So we started running different types of specials with the pumpkin ravioli. We did like a ravioli, brown butter sage sauce kind of thing. And then we also like did fried ravioli to kind of offer different like options, but just to get through this supply that we had already had. And so we didn't have to pay for like new ingredients. We just reused the ones that we already had before they went bad. Think of like crafty ways of reusing the food, and that'll really help keep your costs down. And you should probably do that stuff in general anyways, because you can save a lot of kitchen waste. One, it's like good for the environment, and two, you're like maximizing the amount of money that you're spending, and also increasing the amount of money that you're bringing into the business.
Very good. And Melanie, yes, I'll add a link to their website, to the Street Eats website. Their website is actually bestvendors.com, but I'll just include that within the post-class email. And yeah, they pretty much are nationwide. I think they said they're in like 47 states. So probably almost everywhere except for like Hawaii and Alaska would be my guess. And whatever other state they're missing in. So yeah, check that out. But I think they like work with, I think it's like almost 1,000 different like home improvement stores. So they're most likely where you are. Oh, and then Melanie asked too, and I think we covered this a little bit, but where do you use Costco instead of a grocery store? Like, what are your thoughts on that? I know both, yeah.
All of it. Wherever we can get food from, we get it from. We do Costco, local grocery store, and we even have some farmer friends of ours like that we built relationships with over the years that will give us food. And I don't know if I shared this story, but during the summertime, there's like farmers markets all over the place. And so the farmers markets that we go to, we always like make treats for the farmers. They're so excited. They give us like tons of free vegetables and stuff like that we use to then make next week's surprise for them. But then we get to keep all the rest of it, and that's like our food for the week essentially. So, you know, one of the other crafty ways of saving cash, especially in the beginning, is like make these relationships with food providers, do something for them in like a trade scenario, like, hey, I'm gonna make you a whole bunch of stuff if you want it. And then they give you the food, you make them the thing, and then you use all the other food to like add to your recipes.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Anthony. So next week, same time, same place. I'll send out the recordings of this and, you know, all the follow-up notes by tomorrow at the latest. Next week, just so you know, we have a guest speaker, and his name is Anthony, a different Anthony though. He was in the last Food Truck Academy class. He has a food truck out of Florida. He's going to be sharing his, you know, experience, because this, like 2017 was his first year vending. So he's going to talk about like what it was really like for him to get started. And I think that'll be a good week to just get somebody else's perspective on who's like operated a food truck and just what it's been like for them to get started, especially because he's really close to, you know, I mean, he's just like 6 months away from where you all are in this class are at right now. So, you know, he was in that same spot about 6 months ago. So I think it'll be cool for you to just, you know, be able to ask him questions, and especially since he's just in the process of starting out. So yeah, it should be a really cool time. And just like now with this, Anthony asked, come with your questions, and happy to answer all of them. So yeah, with that, thanks everybody. Awesome time, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Take care. Happy Halloween.